welcome back to another Weird Wednesday. Now you might be wondering what in the world is the title down below, because it's not a Weird Wednesday episode, but it kind of is. Because today we're gonna look at not one, but 4 Weird Tales issues. And the center of all of this is Sam Moskowitz. And I'm gonna tell you about him, about the history of science fiction fandom, and how I got to this place, because for the last week I went down this very deep rabbit hole. I've learned a lot and I need to share it with someone. And most of the people in my life don't really do books or science fiction, so I have to put all of this energy somewhere. So if it interests you, please stay. I promise it's all connected, and if you're anything like me, this will blow your mind, because it's been a really fun week. So a bit of background. If you've been on this channel long enough, you'll know that I absolutely love William Hope Hodgson, who was an English writer. He was always out at sea. He was a bodybuilder, and he wrote some of the earliest weird fiction. But most importantly, he wrote nautical horror and nautical weird, which is absolutely the sweet spot for me. And he inspired Lovecraft to write some of his stuff. Innsmouth setting is definitely drawing on some Hodgson writing for sure. Even though Lovecraft discusses more in his nonfiction essay how Hodgson's masterpiece is The House on the Borderland, which is like the ultimate liminal space, you do get a sense of his nautical descriptions, particularly when it comes to his little fishing town. Now, the reason I bring this up is because one of the reasons I was drawn to these particular 4 is because these 4 are all edited by Sam Moskowitz, and in them he places a non-fiction essay focusing on William Hope Hodgson. So I became a little bit more interested about what's going on here. Weird Tales magazine got started in March of 1923, and it fizzled out by the mid-50s. And then it kind of just became dormant until at the 50th anniversary in 1973, during the summer, Moskowitz put together these 4 issues. So they kind of were released 1 per season until the summer of '94. And in each one, he reprints some of the highlights, but he kind of packs this a bit heavy with nonfiction. And he tries to contextualize weird fiction and the Weird Tales magazines. Not only does he give you gems in terms of stories, he leaves out a bit of the fluff, he leaves out the ads, he leaves out some of the lesser known things, even some poetry. Like, there's very little of that in these. He really draws the reader's attention to nonfiction and how this all fits together. Moskowitz was very focused on the history of science fiction and fandom and readership, things which absolutely fascinate me. So you can understand why I then became more fascinated by Sam Moskowitz. And I started to do a deep dive and tried to find out more about him, which led me to not only get all these 4 weird tales, which we'll flip through at the end, but I wanted to know why and how and, you know, what else. This also led me to get 2 more books about William Hope Hodgson, edited by Moskowitz. So Out of the Storm is one of them, and then this one, okay, which is a gem, is also signed by Moskowitz. It's a limited edition. I really love this, and I treasure it even more now that I know a little bit more about him. So Moskowitz was born in New Jersey in the United States in 1920, and he was a super nerd for science fiction. He loved it. He was super involved right off the bat, and at age 19, he chaired the first ever World Con. I have been to 2 World Cons, and I've done my reading, okay? I thought I knew a lot more about it, but clearly not, because I had no idea that Moskowitz was the chair of the first one in 1939. I also didn't realize that Worldcon started in the middle of World War II. There were a lot of cliques involved. There were a lot of groups amongst the science fiction fandoms. On one side, there was this group that called themselves the Futurians, and this included Sci-Fi author Frederick Pohl and Wollheim, who started the Daw Books imprint. And if you want to know more about that, I highly recommend this video by Jake at the channel Pulp Mortem, because he goes deep into the origins of Daw and all about Wollheim. But what I didn't know was that Moskowitz excluded these people from the very first Worldcon, and it's now gone into science fiction history as the Great Exclusion Act. So if you look that up, it has its own kind of fan lore Wikipedia page where you can learn more about this big feud at the time. And it took place in New York City, and a part of me was like, maybe this is what truly inspired West Side Story. But carrying on with Moskowitz, clearly, as you can tell, he was really big into science fiction. He really liked reading science fiction, and he greatly admired Hugo Gernsback. And Gernsback is kind of known to be the father of science fiction, even though he's a 20th century guy. And the reason for it is because he started this magazine in April of 1926, so 3 years after Weird Tales, called Amazing Stories. And the thing with Amazing Stories is that they could only publish science fiction. No weird stuff, no fantasy, no occult stuff, no gothic reprints. It had some very firm definitions, and Moskowitz loves definitions, and he looked up to Gernsback a lot. I later learned that the origin of the Hugo Awards is named after Hugo Gernsback. They didn't name the Hugo Awards until 1953, and if you were to read Jo Walton's book on the history of the Hugos, which I did a few years back, she starts it off in 1953 looking at the history of who won the Hugo Awards as they were named Hugo. So we're going from 53 to present day, which was when the book came out a few years ago. Worldcon as a whole, as a convention for fans, started in the late 30s. Moskowitz had a day job that had nothing to do with science fiction. This was his escape. He was a nerd for it. He loved to read about it. He loved to be a historian on science fiction and pulpy stuff, and he wrote a lot about it. And he also edited a lot of anthologies in his life, to the point where around the early 50s, when there was an encyclopedia released about who's who and who's an expert on what, under science fiction, Moskowitz was listed as the expert source on science fiction. And also in 53, he was about to publish this incredible book, which I've been reading through in the last week, about the history of science fiction fandom and the readership of sci-fi and how clubs form over time. And to me, this reads a lot like what this SFF corner of BookTube is like, or Bookstagram, or even stuff on Discord and online forums, or even Reddit, right? Because you have these people who are keen on finding each other based on common interest and in their love for fantasy or science fiction or weird stuff, right? The odds of finding someone like this, very slim, because the world is so big and everyone's so divided. I've made some friends recently, and when I kind of tried to look at a map of how far we are from each other, it's like literally 1 in a million, if not more, that the odds of us even finding each other in the real world would ever happen, right? So to think of the fandom starting in the early 20s and 30s with people reading about science fiction and feeling the need to talk about it with people, to start a fanzine that's in hardcover, or in print, I meant, that's tangible. And for someone to then study this, it's a lot more difficult when you process the work involved in doing that kind of meticulous observation and research in a pre-internet era. I want to get the name of the book right. It's The Immortal Storm, A History of Science Fiction Fandom by Sam Moskowitz. And the funny thing is that he published a lot of books. A lot of them were nonfiction about science fiction. A lot of them were anthologies, introductions to anthologies. He has a lot of books with the word infinite in the title, which I love. By the 50s, he was also really good friends with Gernsback himself, who had then started a new magazine called Science Fiction Plus. And he asked Moskowitz to come edit for him and with him. And because of all of these involvements, even though his day job was something in the food industry and he had some side hustles and businesses, he was called upon by Gernsback to do this big editorial job. He absolutely dropped everything and went to do it. And because all of these things were happening, he had a friend at the university, and his friend said, hey, you know, I have this other colleague named Frazier, and he really wants to start teaching a science fiction course. Why don't you meet with him and just, you know, bounce some ideas off each other? Maybe you can help him teach it. This is in 52. He goes to talk to Frazier, and he realizes right away that he is not prepared to teach this class. The other guy knows nothing about science fiction. He would have to do most of it. And the university, on the other hand, would not let Moskowitz teach a class because he didn't have a degree, but Frazier did. So they kind of combined forces, and Frazier was there to be the support and the stand-in degree guy who would give them authority to teach a class, and then Moskowitz was the guy to actually teach. Just before the course got started, there was an ad for it in Science Fiction Plus, and I want to read you this ad because it's pretty nice. It's just like, wow, like how far we've come, you know? The influence and importance of science fiction has increased to the extent where the City College of New York is presenting 2 evening classes on science fiction writing to be given during late September, October, and November, with your managing editor of Science Fiction Plus, Sam Moskowitz, and the former science editor of Parade, Robert Frazier. Imagine how cool you have to be to have as your guest speaker and lecturer Isaac Asimov, Lester Del Rey, Theodore Sturgeon in your first year. In his second year, Robert Heinlein showed up, and Campbell, the editor of Astounding, which later became Analog. I made a whole video on that too. So this course is set to start on September 22nd, and another one on the Friday, but eventually they kind of combined and just left it on one class, one a week, 12 lectures, and it was only the Tuesday. And it's funny because next Monday is the 22nd, so that marks about 72 years since the first science fiction course was ever offered. I think it's pretty cool that we're around that time of year. It was $19 total plus $2 fee for registration, which if you adjust for inflation, it would be about $254 today, US. And it took place at some grammar schools and high schools in the vicinity. I went in depth because Moskowitz himself wrote an academic paper that's 11 pages long describing in detail the circumstances upon which he was given this class to teach. And he took it on, and his friend Frazier really expected him to do a lot. He even wanted him to start his own anthology just for this course alone and publish it just before the class started. And he said, no, I think I know what I'm gonna do. Just let me do it. I have friends. I know who to call for my classes. Like, we're gonna be okay. I'm pretty well connected in the sci-fi world. Now, while Moskowitz did not write down in detail all of the students that were present in his first class, in the second year, because he taught this for 3 years, in the second year, he wrote down all of his students' names. And from the 14 names he writes down, 7 of them are women and 7 of them are men, which kind of surprised me because I always assumed that there was some sort of like stereotype earlier in the day that only men were interested in science fiction, and then we spent the last like 2-3 decades kind of trying to unfold that and say no, like women also like this stuff. But to see it all the way back to the very first sci-fi course was kind of refreshing and nice. Like, it was really cool to know that among his first students it was like a 50-50 division. Frankly, a bit better than my community analytics, if I'm being honest. I'm wondering what it is that he taught in this course, and the book that he selected was the Science Fiction Handbook, written by L. Sprague de Camp, who shows up in a lot of books and a lot of anthologies in this time period. And his book, I skimmed the online version, which is an updated version of that one. The first edition is on its way to me right now because I definitely plan to read this. But from the skimming of the table of contents, it's a little bit more about writing science fiction on your own, drawing on some examples from real science fiction. So people weren't really getting like the history of science fiction, starting with Mary Shelley and working their way through present times, or looking at magazines, but given Moskowitz's in-depth knowledge and history background on the world of science fiction, from the descriptions we get in his academic essay, you understand that he does give people a lot of examples from the fiction writing, and from the ways people have read or interpreted certain things in the past. And he really did like definitions. Like, he really enjoyed amazing stories and Gernsback's views on science fiction because it came with these laid out rules. Like, even some of his guests, like if you think of Asimov, you know, he has like his rules of robotics and like all of his little definitions in their neat little boxes. From 94 onwards, science fiction classes started to be taught everywhere. But to no one's surprise, when Moskowitz died, his kind of legacy was that he did teach the very first science fiction course. That's what was in his obituaries when they were published. And, you know, frankly, I think I'm just in awe because there's this person who's been there all along in the background of so many things, you know, doing a lot of heavy lifting, because he kind of solidifies the importance of fandom, of readership, of a Worldcon, the first one to begin with, and then teaches the very first science fiction class, and at the same time brings academic merit to the work of William Hope Hodgson and solidifies him in the history of weird fiction. And I see all of these contributions as being kind of monumental in many ways. I certainly have a few more works of his to haul, and then I'll get to reading and see what I can learn from this guy, because he seems pretty cool. You can get the Fandom book on Kindle. It is in digital format and it's more accessible that way. It is a bit difficult to find in hardcover. I tried to find it and it's really expensive. So unfortunately, I'm gonna have to stick to the Kindle on this one. Now that we did that, let's go take a look at these 4 weird tales. And we're gonna do a quick flip through all of them and admire some of the Rosicrucian ads. Now, the cool thing is that all of these also have the occult series at the top, so there is a kind of common thread in addition to Moskowitz and Hodgson. So we're going to see a lot more interesting stuff like that. This is the first one. Now, from the table of contents, you can see there's a lot of differences between what we saw before and this one. We don't have the one sentence quippy kind of summary, and we have the 50 years young for the magazine. So here's what I mean by not having as many illustrations. We get just one once in a while. I'm gonna stop at all of the illustrations because we are going through 4 of them, so we don't have all day. There's one. This is The Sign of Venus by Robert W. Chambers. Maybe this would be my my thumbnail in one video. Is there enough light? Maybe I should put more light. The only ad page is the very back page, and we have some games for thinkers. So these are all very cool. Some board games, some theory, 70s fun. And then the Rosicrucians. So then comes this one, which was surprisingly one of the more affordable weird tales that I got. And again, we have the 50th anniversary, the occult. When you skip through, you see that there's one short story by Hodgson, and then we have a selection of Finlay's finest, which is the great artist. Some Bradbury, some Lovecraft. So the Lovecraft is his non-fiction work as well. This is from The Buried Paradise. This is a Clark Ashton Smith and Lynn Carter story called The Utmost Abomination. See, you can't really appreciate Virgil Finlay in black and white, but they do try. It's still gorgeous. This is where you need a better budget for things like this. There is an outstanding book out there that's like a collector's book of Virgil Finlay's work. it's impossible to find. And if you do find it, it's probably very expensive. It's elusive, that one. So we'll get a lot of text. Some good marginal art here. The Smiling People by Ray Bradbury. That's pretty cool too. Funeral in Another Town. This is the Hodgson story. It's very tattooable. Yeah. Yeah. Then we have this beauty right here. Cover by Bill Edwards. Okay. So let's see, the back is kind of the same as the other one with the games. This is the Chambers story. Wow. This is the Cats of Rome. H.P. Lovecraft. Oh, Chicken Soup. And The Balloon Tree. Poor lady. Okay, and then the very last one is this one, which is equally gorgeous, and this is for the summer of 74. So again, same ad. You get the Lovecraft and Edison Marshall's The Son of the Wild Things. It's pretty cool. Timmy by Susan C. Letty. Oh, you know, since we're still talking here, I should mention that cigarettes, right? In the course, in the second, yeah, you know what, I'll just film it right after this. Monsieur de Guise. See, there's a little skeleton figure in there. Finding the Graken. That was The Music Lover by Carl Jacobi. What a great illustration. And the full table of contents. As always, these are digitized and will be linked down below. I'm just gonna check back in because I need to tell you guys something. I forgot to mention this bit of the story, that during the course, Moskowitz was supposed to have Harry Bates to come into one of his classes, and Harry Bates had been mad at Moskowitz because he cut one of his stories, edited it, didn't publish it or something, some drama in the background. So then Bates said that he's coming to the class and then didn't show up last minute. And that was also coincidentally the same class where an auditor came to look at Moskowitz's science fiction course and see if it's worth keeping on. Now, luckily, Moskowitz's knowledge of science fiction was so deep that the guy was just in awe, and he was like, you can absolutely keep teaching this class, it's phenomenal. But years later, years down the line, Harry Bates needed somebody to tell the government that he has been having trouble with his hands and can't write because he has arthritis, so that he can get his pension plan early or something along those lines. And then Moskowitz stepped up and did that for him. And then he got a letter back saying, "I ain't mad at you no more." And that is fun lore from the science fiction history class. The reason I mentioned that is because as I was flipping through the magazines just now with you, I remembered in the subsequent years, in the second and third year classes, in addition to having spectacular guest lecturers, some of his students got published in actual science fiction magazines because of Moskowitz and his relations. So his students not only got to learn things and write and practice and have their works looked at by an actual editor, but they got published, and that's pretty cool too. Now, I was calculating if the class got taught like 72 years ago, pretty much to the day next Monday, if you were 18 years old or something like that, I guess like the youngest person who could potentially have been in that class is now 90 years old. So if anyone knows any of the students to have ever taken this first science fiction class in New York, it would be really cool to track some of these people down and ask them some questions. So if you know that person, because I'm sure they told you about it many, many times. I know I would talk about it nonstop if that was me. So yeah, please let me know if you know any of these people. I'm sure someone out there must, right? Internet, do your magic. All right, I will see you in a future video very soon. Bye.